What's up guys, my name is Ace and welcome back to Spawn Guides, the series where I share all of the spawn locations as well as their behavior on every map in Advanced Warfare. In today's episode, we're going to be covering Team Deathmatch as well as Domination spawns for the map Comeback. Let's get into it. Alright guys, so if you haven't seen the first two episodes of this series, make sure you go and check that out first because I talk about the sort of general spawn behavior in Team Deathmatch and Domination, and it kind of has a base of knowledge that you will need to understand exactly what I'm talking about throughout this series. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. Okay, so Comeback. This is the smallest map in the game, and let's hop right into the Team Deathmatch spawn locations. As you can see, all of these spawn locations on the map are on the outer edge of the map. The larger spawns indicate spawns that are more likely to happen, and the smaller spawns are not nearly as likely to happen as the larger spawns. Now typically with this map, unlike the map Riot, which we covered before, this one has like a circular flow, whereas Riot's more of like a linear flow. So therefore the spawns are constantly flowing around the map in almost like a circular motion, it seems. In most games anyways, that's how most games tend to play out. So typically, if your team is on one corner of the map, the enemy team is going to be spawning on the opposite corner of the map, or opposite zone. And let's look at that zone-based system I talked about in the first episode. These are the approximate zones that I made up for the map Comeback. So essentially with this zone-based system, we aren't worried about the exact spawn point to predict, we're worried more about the zone or the general area of the spawns, because what does it really matter if they're going to spawn on the top left spawn or the one that's right next to it? It really doesn't matter in game, so we go off of a zone-based system. Now I'll just really quickly explain this zone-based system again since we are in the earlier episodes of this series. Basically, if an enemy is within a zone, you will not spawn in that zone most of the time, and those are the spawns we're worried about. We are worried about the spawns that are happening most of the time, and not the really rare spawns and the really bad spawns that we get every now and then. So if there's an enemy in, or if there's enemies in the orange zone, the yellow zone, and the red zone, guess where your team's going to be spawning? In the green zone. Now if there are enemies in every single one of these zones, that's where spawns start to get a little bit crazy, and that's where you might run into some bad spawns. Now you will notice on this map there are two spawns on the left and right hand side, kind of in the middle of the map area. These spawns are not within any zones. And these ones seem to kind of behave as emergency spawns almost. So basically when all of the zones are occupied, or when there's a spawn flip that's happening, it tends to pick one of these two spawns. Alright, so let's have a look at a quick example on this map. So right here, as you can see, the red team does seem to have quite a bit more map control than the green players. And if we bring up that zone-based system, we'll see they're occupying the yellow, the red, the orange, and the green zone. They have a player in every single one of the zones. So what does this mean for the green team? Where will they be able to spawn in this current situation? Well, they still have that one spawn that I was just mentioning on the right hand side of the map that's still completely safe, and that's most likely where they're going to spawn. Now if the red team starts to push a little bit more towards that spawn and starts to put pressure on it, it could potentially flip the green team's spawn to either the yellow or the red zone, or that spawn on the left hand side of the map that's not within one of the zones. Moving on to the second example, and this is a much more likely situation, this tends to be how the map will flow, is one team has control over one corner of the map, and the other team will have control over the opposite corner of the map. So in this situation right here, it's pretty clear to me that the yellow zone belongs to the red team, and the green zone belongs to the green team. So the green team is going to be spawning in that green zone in this current situation, and the red team will be spawning in the yellow zone. Now you might be wondering, what about the red zone? There's nobody in that red zone. Well, essentially, these spawns are neutral. Any team could spawn here if too much pressure is put on their home spawns right now. But because of teammate anchoring, it's always going to anchor close to your teammates, and there's no teammates from any team really in that red zone, so it's not going to anchor to the red zone. It can only be really pushed to that red zone in this current situation. So just as a general rule of thumb with this map, be aware of the corners of the map and whether or not you have teammates or whether or not you are within one of those corners. If you don't have teammates within a certain corner of the map, it's very possible and very likely that an enemy can spawn within that corner. Also, be aware of where your teammates are spawning. If your teammates are spawning in one corner of the map, it's very likely that the enemy team is spawning in the opposite corner of the map. This is happening most of the time for Team Deathmatch on Comeback. Alright, so now it's time to move on to Domination for this map. And Domination is actually a whole lot easier to predict spawns on this map than Team Deathmatch. Basically, almost every single time, the team that holds the C flag is going to be spawning at one of those top left yellow spawns right next to the C flag. And on the other end of that, most of the time, the other team that holds the A flag is going to spawn at the spawn that's either right next to the A flag, just below to the right of it, or the one just below that. I would say about 90 to 95% of the spawns on this map in Domination are going to be at those 4 spawn points. As for the other spawns, these spawns start to happen when players are pushing and putting pressure on the primary spawns by getting within proximity to those primary spawns, or by getting a line of sight on those primary spawns. So this makes it so it's very easy to predict if an enemy is pushing in towards your primary spawns, because you'll start to get one of those other spawns that are a little bit further away from your flag. So for instance, if I hold the C and B flag and I'm not spawning at one of those top left C spawns, I start spawning at one of the other yellow spawns down below the C flag, that means almost every single time that there is an enemy that's pushed up on that rooftop or in that building near the C flag and they're blocking those 2 C spawns. So always be aware of when you or your teammates are spawning at a spawn other than those 4 spawns I mentioned at the beginning. If you or your teammates are spawning at a different spawn, that means the enemy is putting pressure on your primary spawns. Now, one last thing I wanted to point out is you'll notice there are B spawns on this map, and these B spawns are the only spawns that I've ever seen a player spawn at when they only hold the B flag. So if you get into one of those situations where you end up holding C and A, but the enemy team holds B, this is relatively rare, but it does happen every now and then. Be really aware of those 2 big B spawns. The 2 smaller B spawns are really unlikely, but the bigger sized spawns on this map, be really aware of those. That's exactly where those enemy players are going to be spawning. So let's have a look at an example on this map. This situation right here is basically equilibrium. This is what you expect to happen most of the time on this map. Both teams are pushing for the B flag. One team might have a little bit more map control than the other, but both teams are going to be spawning at their home spawns. So the red team is going to be spawning at these 2 spawns, and the green team is going to be spawning at these 2 spawns. This is what you expect most of the time. Now, let's just say that the green players start pushing the bottom half of the map towards the A flag. What does this do to the red spawns? Well, it's going to push them to the top right of the map. And when you start spawning on the top right of the map, you should know that that means that there are enemy players pushing towards the A flag. So always be aware of where you and your teammates are spawning, and that will tell you where the enemies are pushing. So that's going to wrap it up for today's episode of Spawn Guides. Let me know in the comment section below which one of the maps you'd like to see me cover next. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.